Amitabhats, Namo Amitabhats, Namo Amitabhats. Good morning. 75 years ago today, 70,000 people died in Nagasaki when the second atomic bomb was dropped in Japan. 3 days earlier, about 140,000 people died in Hiroshima. There was a fundamental shift in the world. It was incredible how within a day or two, so many people could be killed. And here it is, 75 years later, we are still living in a very uncertain future. In the last 5 months, over 165,000 Americans have been killed by the coronavirus. This has been almost a self-inflicted wound. Medical and health experts tell us that they know how we can limit the spread of this disease. Yet, our national leadership has not shown a coordinated plan or instructed people how we might do and follow the recommendations of the health professionals. We lack testing, we lack some personal protective equipment on some areas of the country, and so we see an increase in the spread of this disease. So we also see that many Americans are not heeding the advice of these health professionals, and so the spread continues, and they endanger the health of all of us. The Buddha somewhat predicted the cause of these things, both the atomic bomb and the spread of the coronavirus. And what he said was, when we suffer the cause of it, one of them is ignorance. And so, as Buddhists, we need to enlighten ourselves to truth and work to minimize the spread of this disease. We're concerned with all our members and friends, and so we encourage you to follow the directions of our health professionals, to stay separate from each other, wear a face mask, wash your hands, and do all the things that have been recommended for us. Now, this is August, and usually in this month, many BCA temples take a break. It allows ministers to take a vacation, and the ministers from Japan have an opportunity to return to Japan to help their home temples during the Obon season. But because in San Diego we are not having any on-site services, we are going to continue our Sunday morning videos and our Buddhism 1, 2, 3 classes on Wednesday evening. Our Dharma talks are one way, and so we will be using our Wednesday evening 1, 2, 3 program to have discussions so we can clarify and define some of the things we talk about on Sunday. And so we invite you to join us on Zoom, where we can expand on the basic message that we have on our Sunday mornings. Now, to give you an idea of August and some of the things we are working on, we want to provide a firm grasp of living Shin Buddhism. And so last week, we talked about the fact that we humans enjoy a different and deeper dimension of life, and we call that spiritual or sacred. Other animals don't have this. We call that the ordinary truth, everyday truth that guide our lives. But then there is this other true reality that includes the deeper unseen nature of things. Today we'll talk about Shakyamuni Buddha's discoveries on how life works and how the human mind works. And this is how it invites us to the larger reality of and the benefits that we share. He teaches us about how the world works and how our mind works within that. This is the basis of leading us to a life of happiness and bliss. Next week we will talk about Shinran and Shin Buddhism, and this is for people who are common working people, and so these profound truths are given to us in a way that we can enjoy it. And then on August 23rd, we'll talk about living Shin Buddhism, how we contemporary Shin Buddhists might actually live or practice the Shin teachings. And so it's important for us to understand how we can live these teachings and not just understand it from an intellectual standpoint. It's a question we can answer. What is our life about? And so these talks on this August will be used as a basis for future talks. So today, we'll talk about what Shakyamuni Buddha discovered. Last week, I think we did establish that there is this different dimension. It's unseen. It's as if we were in an airtight chamber and we couldn't see the air around us, and yet we might go about our business. But as we live, our oxygen in this airtight chamber would slowly turn to carbon dioxide as we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. And eventually, that carbon dioxide could kill us because it's something we can't see. This is somewhat similar to what we may talk about our lives, that there are unseen factors, and that sometimes the ordinary truths we live by are limited and don't suffice. Now, this different dimension is something that other animals can't do. We live in a time when we can talk and see people in different places and in different times. Now, I'm doing that right now. We do this electronically. And this might be somewhat similar to what happens on the spiritual plane, where we can communicate and think about others who have passed on from the distant past. This is what we might call the sacred or spiritual realm, and this is the realm of Namo Amida Butsu. So let's reflect today on how we came to this realization. About 2,500 or 600 years ago, a human being named Siddhartha Gautama was born. And he had similar questions. He lived the life of a prince, but that didn't seem to bring him true happiness. So he left that life and followed 5 monks and became an expert and mastered the arts of ascetics, meditation, and many other practices. And yet he could not find true happiness there. So he left the monks and vowed to sit under a tree in deep meditation until he did discover truth. And we celebrate December 8th as the day that we say he was enlightened, where he became a Buddha and realized the truth of all life. Now, he sat in bliss after awakening to this truth, and a passerby came by named Upaka. And he saw the Buddha's aura and asked him, "Sir, are you a god?" And the Buddha replied, "No, I am a human being, but I am awake." And so we, as Buddhists, we're in the process of awakening. Upaka answered, "Oh, you're awake." He said, "Ah," and he went on. Now, we had been hearing the teachings of the Buddha. Will we be like Upaka, who could have been one of the early disciples of the Buddha? Or will we just move on and say, and just move on and live our ordinary lives under our ordinary truths and say, maybe we should listen to our national leaders and try to get our economy back on track. Now, what did the Buddha awaken to? I'll give you a simplified version in this short talk. What he realized was that living a life that was full of luxury and wealth gave him no pleasure, nor was the life of an ascetic, of meager means and austerity. And so he talked about the middle path, a balance of all things. It's said that the night before he was enlightened, he was attacked by Mara's forces of this army trying to harm him. And he was tempted by Mara's daughters. And the Buddha was not affected by this because he said that these were creations of his own mind, and so he was able to ignore them. And so Buddhism is about refining the mind, and it's to refine it to live with the truth of what we see. And what he observed with that, there were 2 things that were fundamental. And this was impermanence. Everything changes, everything is temporary. And the other thing he saw was that everything was interconnected, that nothing has a separate entity. Things are changing all the time. And so impermanence and interdependence are fundamental. And these things are not determined by a God. They're like gravity. They're there. You can believe in them or not. Just like Newton discovered gravity, he didn't invent it. He observed it and named it. And so we Buddhists and all living things are affected by true reality. We're connected and we change. And so as humans, this is all we have to do. Go with the flow of interdependence and impermanence. But sometimes we can't do that. And the reason for that is something we call ego, or this awareness or sense of self. And it's because of this ego that we like some changes and we don't like other changes. And we like some relationships and we don't like other relationships. And so it's this attachment to ego that keeps us from enjoying life. So the Buddha talked to us about the Four Noble Truths, in that if our life is off balance, uncomfortable, diseased, it's caused by this attachment to our ego. It's often our greed, our hatred, our ignorance that keeps us from going with the flow. But he said that there is also nirvana, the opposition of dukkha, or suffering, and that we can extinguish this sense of ego. And we do that by following the Eightfold Path, the Fourth Noble Truth. And so how do we let go of this ego self? Well, there might be one way, and that is to leave our ordinary life. That's not very helpful to those of us who have families and live in ordinary times. But this is one path, those who leave home. Now, if we're concerned with how we look, all we have to do is shave our heads. And as far as clothing, we could just wear one robe. Personally, I really enjoyed being in the Air Force for a time, because every morning I could wake up and I would go to the closet, I'd get my blue shirt, blue pants, blue tie. It was very simple. These days it's a little harder, where I have to get a shirt, matching pants, and a tie that kind of matches the same, and it's very complicated for me. But in any event, it was easy for monks because they had no possessions. And as far as food, they had a variety every day, because whatever was placed in their begging bowl, they got to eat, if they were given anything at all. So what monks did and do every day, they just study, meditate, and try to live the precepts. They purify the mind. And this is the monastic path, following the precepts. Do not kill, steal, lie, take intoxicants, or abuse sex. And this is the path of a bodhisattva, who takes a vow not to awaken, not to be enlightened until all other beings are. And this really epitomizes the thought of oneness, the thought of the me within the we, that we are all interconnected, and so rather than thinking of the self, it's thinking of others first. And the practice also involves the 6 paramitas. For bodhisattvas, it would be 10. With its dana, or charity, discipline, patience, perseverance, meditation, and wisdom. And so this is the monastic path, the Theravada school of elders. And later, another method would be formed in Buddhism called Mahayana. So to summarize, and just these are generalizations, but what are the essential messages of the Buddha? And how does it differ from some Western religions? Basically, it is to wake up, to align ourselves with how the world works and how our minds work, to refine the mind, the heart, the body, and our spirit, to be aware of impermanence and interdependence, to be guided by the Four Noble Truths, to practice the precepts and follow the Eightfold Path, and the middle path, the balance of all things. So we would guide our lives according to what is true and real, and it makes our life much easier. It makes our ride not so bumpy, but it makes our life smooth and results in harmony and happiness. So it's not based so much on whether we are being good or bad. This is dualistic. And yet, if we follow the path, we often find that we do good. And we don't have what might be known as God's, what is determined by God. So we don't seem to have judgment, guilt, redemption, forgiveness, prayer, those kinds of things. Although we might talk about them, they're not emphasized in Buddhism. But my curiosity with some indications of God is that we hear of God's directives through humans, like me. We have priests who sometimes give us an inaccurate description of what they think God is saying. And as Buddhists, the Buddha told us that we are each a light unto ourselves. So we must have a clear mind according to our own practice. Now, those who find this path of sages difficult, we'll talk about next week as Shinran and Jodo Shinshu. So what I've been talking about is practicing a practice to make words become real. And so I encourage people to embody this part of the practice by perhaps following the Eightfold Path, following the Six Paramitas, and trying to live by the precepts. Be kind and gentle to others. Don't be greedy, hateful, or ignorant, or do stupid things. Accept change and be mindful. These are some of the things that the Buddha talked about, and if we try to practice that, I'd like to have a discussion. And so we invite you to join us on Wednesday nights, Buddhism 1, 2, 3, where we can discuss this and clarify some of these things we say. And until then, we'll meet either Wednesday or next Sunday as we talk about Shinran and Jodo Shinshu. So please join me in expressing our deepest appreciation for the teachings of the Buddha. Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda.